Many of you have gone through verbal dialogue with me in the last 5 sessions in nearly 5 days. And I was wondering this morning whether the communication is really taking place. For the communication to take place, the cooperation between the speaker and the listener is required. And one wonders how the listening has been taking place. I hope everyone is aware that this is a spiritual gathering, not an academic gathering, where theories and ideas are shared and discussed. In a spiritual, sacred gathering, it is life that is shared. It is the understanding of the facts of psychological life that is shared. And is it possible for every one of us to see the fact and the truth behind it when it is pointed out with the help of words? Supposing someone points out this is a microphone or that is an amplifier, then one sees the fact of that microphone or the amplifier immediately. There is an immediacy of perception when the fact is pointed out verbally. Is there an immediacy of perception when psychological facts are pointed out? Is there the sensitivity to observe or to look at the fact when it is pointed out? Or do we listen to the words and imagine that they are ideas or theories? Do we reduce the words to ideas and theories? Do we compare them with the words of someone else? And while the listening is take place, say to ourselves, this is something like Krishnamurti. That portion is something like Zen Buddhism. No, that resembles Vedanta. If the listening is going on that superficial level of evaluating and comparing, then the sharing cannot take place. Sharing requires the receiver as well as the giver. We have been trained in schools and colleges, universities, to listen to ideas, to theories, to acquire them, to store them in memory. So we have been living by knowledge. We are trained to acquire pieces of information put them together, organize them into knowledge, and use them. This is what we have been trained for centuries. And when someone comes around and says, look here, I am not going to talk about ideas or theories. In all simplicity and humility, would you like to share the truth that I understand? So, act of listening requires a modicum of depth. It requires seriousness and the sensitivity to perceive the facts when they are pointed out. For example, it has been pointed out in different ways in the last 5 sessions. Public talks, the evening meeting with women, and the 2 meetings yesterday, that the content of what we call mind or consciousness is thought. It's a stream of thought. And thought contains knowledge and experience of the total human race. So every human being contains the totality of human race and its experiences within oneself. One points out that when we feel that we are thinking, that activity of thinking is referring back to the past, and the response of the past is called my thought, my emotion, my values, my likes and dislikes. Our thoughts and emotions are nothing but the playback of that total thought stream. Therefore, thinking is a mechanistic activity. In whichever field you carry it, the movement of the mind is a mechanistic, a repetitive movement. Now, do we observe this fact as we listen to the words? Have we looked at our minds and observed the movement of thought, the movement of what we call pleasure and pain, the movement of our preferences and prejudices? Have we ever watched them? To watch the movement of thought is a tremendous thing. When one thus watches the movement, watch the thought moving in daily relationships, then you will discover the mechanistic and repetitive nature of it. The mechanistic and repetitive nature has been described, but the description is not the reality. The description is not that which is described. The word is not the thing. We are not going to carry back words from here. The mechanistic and repetitive nature has been pointed out when it was said that thoughts and ideas are concepts. Human beings constructed concepts and symbols to represent those concepts and use them. So the movement of thought is the movement on the conceptual level. The mind cannot move without the concept of time. The mind cannot move without a word, without measurements. The movement of mind is the movement of measurements. In dozens of ways, one goes back and points out step by step that this whole thought structure put together through centuries by the total human race is something mechanical. It's a superstructure on the reality on the isness of life. Life has no structures, no pieces put together, no measurements. It is a homogeneous wholeness. Now supposing one has observed these and one has seen the fact of the mechanistic nature of thought. It has been pointed out that what we call the I, the me, has also only a conceptual reality. It has been put together, layers and layers of identification. The children are taught to identify with the name, with the form, with the description of the form, with the weaknesses and strengths of the form, and so on. The me, as the center of knowledge and experience, is not an independent entity. It has no separate reality from the whole thought structure. In other words, the me that observes is a part of that which is observed. They are not separate entities. The observed and the observer, that which is watched, the movement that was watched, and the watcher, the me, the I, they are not separate entities, they are one and the same. And this movement of thought, this movement of the me, is not able to embrace the totality, to perceive the totality, to capture the wholeness of life. It cuts the life into pieces. As you want to analyze matter and you cut down matter to atoms, electrons, protons, analyze them, study them. So, for a scientific study, we have been analyzing. And for analysis, you break things into pieces. Now, life and the wholeness of life is non-fragmentable. It cannot be broken to pieces. It cannot be cut down for the convenience of your analysis and putting it back into synthesis. Life is sacred because it is a wholeness. It is homogeneous. Therefore, you cannot cut into pieces. If you cut the arm from the body and throw it on the ground, it is no more an arm, no more an arm. It's just a piece of flesh and bone. It becomes an arm when it is a part of the whole body. So life is an organically homogeneous wholeness. That is the mystery of life. That is the sacredness and holiness of life. So do we see that through thought, through the movement of the me, do what you will, you cannot reach the divinity, the God, the reality, the ultimate reality, the wholeness of life. You cannot reach it. The movement of me on any level whatsoever, sensual, extrasensory, physical, psychophysical, psychical, as long as the me moves and wants to take an experience, It is going to divide life, an imaginary division of the me and the not me, and the me taking the experience of the divinity. Man has been playing that game for thousands of years. He has created gods, temples, mosques, churches. One God, many gods and goddesses, personal God, impersonal God. Heaps of books describing the God and the divine. It's the me that is moving, trying to capture the wholeness into some words, give some forms. As soon as the me moves and tries to capture the divinity in experience, you are reducing the divinity to a conceptual level. Because an experience is a recognition of an event with the help of what we have known in the past. I hope we know how events get converted into experiences. You identify the event. You recognize it, give it a name. Refer it to the past. Recognize, interpret it. Recognition requires interpretation. And interpretation takes place with the help of the past, knowledge or experience, individual or collective. Otherwise, event does not become an experience at all. So we play that game. So when the me moves and says, I shall see God, I shall be illuminated, I shall be free or enlightened, I shall get transformed, the me is moving very shrewdly, cunningly, wanting to touch the wholeness and cut it to its own shape, to the size of the me, to the shape of the me, to the level of the me, so that it can say, I have it in my hands. This is liberation. This is enlightenment. I am enlightened. We have been victimized by this language of the me capturing the divine. It's just a play of imagination, new beliefs, new gods, new goddesses, new patterns of concepts and new symbols to represent those concepts. We throw away the old ones and we gather the latest concepts and latest symbols. But it's the movement of the me. How can you ever verbalize about the wholeness? For describing, for defining, you have to distinguish it from something else. The wholeness, the totality, defies verbalization. Can you ever describe what love is? Can we ever define and describe what beauty is? We may write poetry. And yet the beauty remains ever virgin, ever untouched, unmolested by verbalization. So do we see that the movement of the me has to discontinue totally, absolutely, for the communion with the wholeness? Meditation is a state of communion with the homogeneous wholeness of life and living out of that communion. As long as the me is moving, the thought structure is moving, that communion is denied to us. Thought, which is fragmentary, denies the communion with the totality. Do we see that? It is so very difficult to see this simple truth because thousands of years we have been told otherwise. Do this and you shall get transformed. Do the other thing and you shall be enlightened. You will see God. It has been hammered into our ears that the communion with God is going to be the result of our action. On the psychophysical level, that has been the arrogance of mankind. As we have felt that we are the masters of the world and the whole universe exists only to subserve our interests, we have also felt that we can see and we can experience that universal life. Life is sacred, it is holy, it defies the touch of your thought, ideas, concepts, and verbalization. So, if we are interested in meditation as a way of life, implying thereby living in communion with the totality, with that homogeneous wholeness, the movement of the me, the thought, has got to discontinue unconditionally and immediately. If I say, I will sit in silence, if you ask me to sit in silence for 20 hours a day, and while sitting, I am waiting for something to happen to me. Please tell me what will happen when I sit in silence, then I'll sit down. Will that thing happen to me which has happened to J. Krishnamurti? Will it happen to me what happened in the life of Buddha, Lao Tse, Confucius? Will it happen to me what happened to Jesus when he went to the mountain top and spent 40 days there? Tell me first what is going to happen. Then I'll sit in a corner, won't do anything, sit in a corner and wait for that to happen. Is that silence? If we are waiting for something to happen, the something that which we have read about and heard about, and there is a desire that it should happen to me, I am putting it mildly, it must happen to me. I want it. I want it to happen to me. Therefore, as a bargain, I am willing to sit down in silence 20 hours a day. If you want me to eat vegetarian meals, okay, no smoking, no drinking, everything, that's a bargain. You cannot bargain with the divine. The divinity cannot be bound by your timetable, schedules, expectations. It cannot be dictated, cannot be dominated by our so-called holy behavior. So when we sit in silence, do we carry that expectation in a clandestine way, hide it under our seat, and wait there for something to happen? If that is what we are doing, then the tension, the subtle tension of expectation, will not allow the total relaxation to take place. Or when I sit down to spend time in quiet or in silence, is the state of mind like this, that the mental movement is irrelevant. The movement of the me, the thought, is irrelevant. It's of no use. It's meaningless. It's an obstacle. And therefore, I stop. The me, which is the thought structure, voluntarily stops, saying that nothing doing, no waiting, no expectation, no imagination, not being present in a corner to register what is happening, record it. That can be taken up by the students of psychology who want to study the mind, analyze it, and teach about the mind in universities, colleges. That's relevant. We are talking about spiritual inquirers. If there is a willingness to allow the whole movement of thought to go into non-action, willingness for the me to stop not only doing but waiting, then our way of living will change. We will minimize the area where the mental movement is necessary for earning the livelihood. And when we have simplified our way of living, minimize the areas where mental movement, verbalization is necessary, the rest of the time we conserve all the energy at our disposal and allow the thought structure to relax into non-action. Not as a means to an end, but as an end in itself. We have seen the falsity of the me. We have seen the mechanistic nature of thought. And therefore, we allow it, or we, being the part of that, voluntarily go into abeyance. We don't move. Simply, we do not move. We stop. Do we stop that way? Silence is the discontinuity, voluntary discontinuity of the me, the I, the self, the ego, discontinuity of that movement. I am groping with words today. We are going slow because we are entering deep waters of the area where time and space do not exist. So there is an ending of the movement of thought. In silence, there is an ending of the movement of me, the movement of thought. In the ending of that movement, time comes to stand still. Time being one of the concepts of the mind does not move. Thought and time move together. When the thought does not move, the time also comes to a standstill. All measurements have gone into abeyance. There is neither the center nor the circumference. I am afraid that we go through verbal investigation, learning about the mechanism of mind, chemistry of thought, very assiduously and work very hard. But when it comes to this total discontinuity of mental movement, we get frightened. We are afraid that in the ending of the thought, there could be death. If the me dies, If that I, the ego, the self that I have cultivated and society has asked me to cultivate, a personality, an identity, I have spent all my life doing that. Supposing it dies through that silence, then how will I go back to my work? How will I function in my family? So the me must not die. It must be retained for the sake of other aspects of my life. That fear holds back many an inquirer. Come to the frontiers of verbalization. Come to the frontiers of the known. They understand, they can explain what the mind is and how it is repeated. Everything is verbally, intellectually understood. But when they come to the actual spot and the point of silence, then the fear grips. What will happen if the me, through such abeyance and non-action, gets paralyzed? If it doesn't function, what will happen to me? Do you understand? Do you see the content of this fear? If we had not presumed that the movement of the me is the totality of our life, would there be fear? We have equated the wholeness of our life with the movement of the I, the movement of thought. We don't know anything else because we have done the whole of our life moving through the mind. That's what we have been trained for. So while moving through the mind, while using the concepts, etc., we have come to believe that the movement of the me is the totality of my life. We have limited ourselves to that narrow ego, the self, the I consciousness. Even after knowing that it is constructed by the human race, it's a myth, it's only conceptual reality. After having seen this intellectually, there is still the identification with the me and the illusion that it is the total life. Please do see this. If we did not presume that the movement of the thought is the totality of life and living, if we did not identify the totality of life with that tiny little petty me or ego, would there be fear? Fear is the expression of that identification. If the identification is not there, if we do not mistaken the I, the me, the self for the wholeness of ourselves, then there would be simplicity. Well, this is not relevant, let it stop. What will happen after it stops completely? Well, let me see. Let it happen. What happens? So I think the fear of the death of the me grips at the first encounter with silence, and an inquirer turns back to the security of verbalization and feels better in the event of transformation than this fear of the death of me. Transformations or mutations are not the privileges of the chosen few. It is within the reach of every human being. Supposing an inquirer says to himself or herself, well, I am afraid, I don't know what will happen when the thought does not move. If there is fear, I'll tremble. If there are tears, I'll cry, but I'll stick it out. I'm not going to go back. I'll be with the fact of the ending of the movement of thought. If an inquirer remains with that fact, arrives there where the me voluntarily goes into non-action and remains in that state of non-action, that total relaxation, then the very ending of the movement of thought is the beginning of the movement of intelligence. There's no time lag between the ending of the thought movement and the activization of intellect. When you remain with the fact, steady, firm, putting your teeth into it, that very act being total activizes intelligence, a different energy. The interaction with the fact stimulates the energy. One doesn't have to do anything. One just has to see what the mind is, what the thought is, and be willing to discontinue moving in any direction whatsoever. Hoping, imagining, wanting, expecting. No movement in any direction. Just to be still. It is that stillness which explodes into the activization of an unconditioned energy. It's not the result of my going into non-action or abeyance, but the ending of the movement of thought, that fact brings it about. Please, let us not confuse it with my doing it. In that stillness, there is a superconductivity and a super receptivity that comes about in the whole being. You get charged. And the communion with that which is beyond time and thought takes place when you have completely emptied yourself of thought, knowledge, and experience. It's an occurrence, it's a happening that takes place. So what do we do in our daily lives so that living in communion with that wholeness comes about? If I were to begin, as I said a few minutes ago, I would simplify my life as far as possible. I will minimize verbalization and socialization, minimize the areas where this mechanistic movement is obligatory. Where it is obligatory, I'll go through it attentively, alertly, and sensitively. I will not get into habit patterns, will not become addict to smoking, to drinking, to gossiping. These are wastages of energy, leakages of vital energy. So I'll see that I do not become addict to any habits. Whatever the habit is, it will mean entering into new repetitive movement that will dull my brain. I will become inattentive, and in the darkness of inattentiveness, the seeds of misery and sorrow are sown. So if I am a victim of or addict to any habits like this, where I get polluted, I'll get rid of those habits. I understand, I see intelligently, and I have the priority, top priority of exploring the meditative way of living. Therefore, I don't waste a single minute in stupid or silly habits. So along with the simplification and minimization, the setting oneself free of these unwarranted stupidities is the movement that takes place in my life. And then whenever I have leisure, in my family life, in the situation of job, whenever I have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, free to myself, I sit down quietly so that the thought structure gets an opportunity to discontinue its movement. Whatever posture, whichever place, but one creates an opportunity for the thought structure to discontinue its activity. How many times shall we do it? Does a child ask how many times it should go to play? It loves playing. As soon as there is time, it out of the house and, into the lanes to play with other children. When you love to do something, you do not make timetables. Timetables are made when you are compelled to do things and there is a resistance from within. So to fight the resistance, you prepare a timetable. This is my schedule. I'll sit half an hour in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, 45 minutes in the afternoon. Why does that become necessary? Because there is resistance from within. Or I am compelling it. If entering into silence is a movement of understanding the urgency of the situation, then whenever you have leisure, you will turn to that. There will be a kind of hunger, a yearning. So accepting the responsibilities of the family and earning the livelihood. If one has a job that consumes too much energy, too much time, one will find out if there is a possibility of having a job that doesn't consume so much energy and time. Simplifying the needs of physical needs, one would change the job, but the leisure time, the free time will be utilized for this new exploration. So spending the time in silence or giving an opportunity to the thought structure to relax into non-action is not a ritual. We are not going to create new rituals. But sitting down consciously, steadily, quietly, is necessary as a part of self-education. The moment one has learned to be in communion with the divine, one has learned the art of putting this whole complex mental movement into non-action. Then the language of sitting in silence also becomes irrelevant throughout the day. Whatever you be doing, you will be moving out of that communion and not out of the fragmentation of the mental level. When one lives in communion with the wholeness of life, that wholeness being sacred and holy, one partakes of that holiness, that sacredness, and therefore there is a flavor of sanctity and holiness in whatever that person does, whether scrubs the floor, cooks a meal, washes the clothes, types letters, works in office, works as a bus conductor. That quality of sacredness, that quality of holiness manifests through every movement of that person, because life becomes sacred then. It's only living in communion with the totality that brings about sacredness or holiness. Not changing the clothes or names, not running away from our homes or families to some ashrams and monasteries. Sacredness or holiness is not something that you have to hang on your sleeve so that people notice it and call you a holy person. That communion brings about a transformation in the quality of being. And wherever the person might be, whatever the person might be doing, a transformation in the quality of being, and wherever the person might be, whatever the person might be doing, there is that quality of peace, wholeness, which is freedom, wholeness, which is love, in every word and deed of the person. So we do not divide life into religious part and secular part, and do not look upon working in the house, the home, the family as something secular, and sitting down in a room something religious. Life cannot be divided. Religiosity is a quality that communion gives to the person. So one should not worry about how to sit in silence. Is there any process? Is there any technique? There cannot be any technique. When you are moving away from the center, techniques and formulas and methodologies become relevant. If you want to learn Padmasana or Sarvangasana, the asanas of yoga, you need a teacher. It's a psychophysical movement and you must do it correctly. If you want to chant a mantra where you are using sound energy, you must know how to pronounce correctly so that the letter releases the vibrations of that sound energy, which will create the desired effect. Every letter has a range of vibrations. And when you use sound energy through japa or chanting, you have to be extremely careful, because you are playing with not only sound, you are playing with the energy of light contained in it. Sound contains fire. Light and sound are intra-convertible energies. Any physicist will tell you. So when you wrap yourself into certain sounds, you are playing with very serious principle of life. So there you need a teacher, you need training, you need supervision. Whichever movement you take away from the center, there is a direction, there is a method. But when you are going back to the center and being at the center, there cannot be any method or technique. Oh, but we sit down quietly and the mind is not quiet. Okay, because it never had a chance to be quiet. It moves. Well, let it move. What do? You are the mind, but only you are a self-conscious energy, so you look at that moving. As you look at yourself in the mirror, you sit quietly, and in the mirror of that quietness, when your own movement is exposed, look at it. What do I do with that movement? Nothing. You are not there to do anything. You are there to relax. But the movement comes between you and relaxation, therefore you are looking at it. How long shall I look? As long as the movement is there. How shall I look? Look innocently. When you don't have to change it, you don't have to conquer it, you don't have to destroy it, don't have to crush it. Just watch innocently as you watch the clouds of an evening sky. Or a beautiful bird on wings in the expanse of skies. Then in the very innocent look or that innocent watching, the consciousness that you are watching will disappear. The effort of watching will disappear. You begin with the feeling that I am watching. But when you do not compare, do not evaluate, do not judge, when the whole movement of the past gets suspended in that state of observation, the observer as the center cannot last long. It's only when we try to touch what is being observed that the observer is given prolongation of life. What do I do when nothing appears before me? We create problems, you know. We can convert every fact into a problem. I sit there, but I don't see anything. You're lucky. Oh, but I feel emptiness. Be with that emptiness. Do you see? We want to do something with what is happening. We cannot allow things to happen to us. We feel responsible that we must do something to it. There is emptiness. Let there be emptiness. I feel the emptiness is a bottomless pit. I don't know where to go, what to do. Wonderful. You are a state in non-knowing. You are in a state of non-knowing. Be in that state. Don't do anything. Don't try to measure the silence with that old stale knowing and your definitions and descriptions and categories. Be with it. Enjoy that emptiness. Yes, but now I am not even aware that there is emptiness. I don't know what is happening. Well, that's still better. See, the temptation to know what is happening, to interpret the new in the terms of the old, continues for some time, and therefore patience is required. We are grown-ups, heavily conditioned, and we are trying to explore a new dimension. So we require patience in that period of education. Our impatience may be the only obstacle in the self-education. So I carry on my life, with the family, with the job, as long as it's absolutely necessary for me, but try to minimize the areas of mental and verbal movement as far as I can. Simplify my life. As it was pointed out yesterday, purification on the physical and verbal level through a scientific approach to diet, nutrition, sleep, exercises, etc. Helping the body and the speech to become very sensitive. You know, when you speak with the austerity of truthfulness, then your speech becomes vibrant with energy. Then the words are not stale. When you spend time in silence and in communion with the wholeness, your words have the depth of that wholeness. They are no more manifestation of the shallowness. They don't stink with fragmentation anymore. They have the freshness of that wholeness. So, the purification on the physical and verbal level can take place as self-education. And then in the simplicity and humility, we create opportunities for ourselves when the thought structure, that is the me, can voluntarily discontinue its movement so that the other can take place. And I think the watch says the time is over. You may try to communicate on the verbal level about the wholeness, about meditation as a state of communion, and yet, even after having talked for an hour, you feel that there are more things unsaid than those that were said. So I think now from 12 to 12:30, from the verbal, we move into the non-verbal communion.